The signal arrived on a Tuesday. Captain Sarah Chen was reviewing maintenance logs on the Lunar Defense Station when every screen in the command center suddenly flickered to life. The message wasn't encoded in any known language. It was pure mathematics, the universal constant that bridged the gap between species that had never met. "Get me the Secretary General," she ordered, her eyes fixed on the scrolling equations. "And someone wake up Dr. Harrison." Within hours, the message had been decoded. It wasn't a greeting, or a warning, or even a threat. It was a request for help, broadcast with such power that it had reached across half the galaxy. The Collective, an alliance of 17 spacefaring civilizations, needed humans, not their technology. Earth was still centuries behind most of the galaxy in that regard. Not their resources. A dozen worlds in the Collective had more raw materials than Earth could dream of. They needed humans themselves, for a task that had claimed the lives of over 10,000 of their best and brightest. "Let me understand this correctly," Dr. James Harrison said, running his hand through his disheveled gray hair as he addressed the emergency UN Council. "They need volunteers to enter what they're calling a quantum anomaly that's threatening to destabilize their primary fuel source. Every species that's attempted to study or neutralize it has failed, with a mortality rate of nearly 100%. The holographic representative of the Collective, a tall crystalline being that called itself Observer, pulsed with affirmation. "Correct. We have lost our finest minds to this endeavor. The anomaly defies our most advanced scientific principles. It changes, adapts, almost as if it's alive. And you think humans might succeed where others failed?" Sarah asked, leaning forward in her chair. "Your species possesses unique characteristics we have observed from afar. You combine logical reasoning with what we would consider reckless intuition. You make impossible leaps of judgment that somehow work. You survive situations that should, by all mathematical models, be unsurvivable." The council chamber erupted in murmured discussions. The Secretary General raised her hand for silence. "And if we refuse?" Observer's crystalline form dimmed slightly. "The anomaly grows. Our calculations suggest it will reach Earth's sector within 30 of your years. We do not ask this purely for our benefit." Dr. Harrison laughed, drawing surprised looks from around the room. "Well, that's simple then. We'll help." "Simple." The Secretary General's voice was sharp. "This is a potential suicide mission." "Exactly," Harrison replied, grinning. "Tell me, Observer, have any of your species ever climbed Mount Everest?" The crystalline being pulsed in confusion. "Your planet's highest peak?" "No. The atmospheric conditions and temperature make such an attempt unnecessarily dangerous. And yet humans do it regularly. Not because we have to, but because it's there. Because someone said it couldn't be done." Harrison turned to address the council. "You're looking at this wrong. Don't think of it as a suicide mission. Think of it as the ultimate challenge." Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. She knew where this was going. She'd seen it countless times in her years of service, that uniquely human spark that ignited when someone said, "Impossible." Within 24 hours of the news going public, over 50,000 humans had volunteered. Scientists, soldiers, adventurers, and ordinary people, united by that inexplicable drive to push boundaries. The Collective's representatives watched in stunned silence as humanity approached certain death, not with resignation, but with enthusiasm. "I don't understand," Observer communicated to Sarah as they reviewed potential candidates. "Your people are aware of the mortality rate." "Oh, yes," Sarah replied, scrolling through the files. "That's part of the appeal for some of them. But mostly, we've spent our entire history doing things everyone said couldn't be done. First person to cross an ocean. They said it was impossible. First powered flight. Impossible. First steps on the moon. Impossible." She looked up at the crystalline being. "We have a rather complicated relationship with that word." Observer's form shimmered in what Sarah had learned to recognize as bewilderment. "You find pride in defying statistical probability." We find pride in proving that statistical probability isn't destiny. Sarah paused on a particular file. Here, Dr. Maya Patel, quantum physicist with a background in extreme environment survival, also holds 3 free diving records. The combination seems unusual. Welcome to humanity, Sarah said with a grim smile. We're going to need unusual. We're going to need people who can think in ways your civilizations haven't tried. Because that's what humans do best. We improvise, we adapt, we overcome. As Sarah began assembling her team, a thought struck her. Observer, you said you've been watching us. What made you think we might succeed where others failed? The crystalline being was silent for a long moment. We observed a human child attempting to complete a puzzle. When the pieces did not fit as designed, instead of discarding it as defective, they created their own pattern. It was incorrect by the manufacturer's standards, but it was beautiful, functional, impossible, just like your species. Sarah laughed. Observer, I think that's the most accurate description of humanity I've ever heard. As the sun set over the Emergency Council building, humanity prepared for its greatest challenge yet. Not for glory, though that might come. Not for wealth, though that was promised. They prepared because something out there was impossible, and if there's one thing humans couldn't resist, it was proving impossible wrong. The collected ship hung in high Earth orbit like a crystalline snowflake, its geometric patterns shifting in ways that made human eyes water. Inside, Captain Sarah Chen's newly assembled team gathered for their first briefing, each member chosen for qualities that the collective civilizations found puzzlingly human. Dr. Maya Patel sat cross-legged on the floor, quantum equations floating in holographic display around her as she absently solved them with one hand while juggling 3 stress balls with the other. The collected scientists had been horrified by her insistence that physical movement helped her think. They'd been even more disturbed when her solutions proved correct. The anomaly doesn't just break physics, she explained, catching the balls without looking. It refuses to accept that physics exists in the first place. Every attempt to measure it changes its properties. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall, while the Jell-O is arguing about whether walls are real. Beside her, Carmen Rodriguez, their systems engineer, snorted. She'd been banned from 3 different engineering conferences for what she called creative solutions and what others called terrifying violations of safety protocols. The fact that her solutions worked didn't make them any less terrifying. So we're dealing with quantum mechanics having an existential crisis, Carmen said, her fingers dancing over a tablet as she modified their equipment designs. Sounds fun. Fun isn't the word the collective uses, Observer interjected, its crystalline form pulsing with concern. Their last expedition disappeared completely. No debris, no signals, just gone. But they were looking for answers in the wrong place, said the 4th member of their core team. Dr. Aidan O'Reilly was a chaos theorist who'd made his name studying what he called the mathematics of human intuition. He stood at the viewport, watching Earth rotate below. They tried to understand it. We need to dance with it. Sarah watched her team with a mixture of pride and concern. They were brilliant, unconventional, and possibly insane by most species standards. In other words, perfectly human. Observer, she said, turning to their crystalline liaison, you've shown us the data from previous attempts. But tell me something else. What did it feel like? Being near the anomaly. The crystalline being's form flickered, a sign of discomfort they'd learned to recognize. It felt wrong, as if reality itself was questioning its existence. Our most logical minds couldn't bear it. They broke. Maya stopped juggling, her eyes bright with understanding. And that's exactly why you need humans. We question reality all the time. We make up stories about impossible things. We dream. We imagine. We look at the rules of the universe and ask, what if? Other species do this as well, Observer protested. Not like us, Carmen said, looking up from her tablet. We do it for fun. We deliberately seek out ways to safely experience the impossible. Have you ever heard of virtual reality? Or better yet, literature? Aiden laughed. Remember when you showed us those images of the anomaly? Your scientists called them disturbing violations of natural law. My first thought was that they'd make amazing album covers. Sarah watched Observer's reaction carefully. The collective had chosen humanity for their perceived recklessness, but they were beginning to understand it went deeper than that. Humans weren't just willing to face the impossible. They embraced it, reimagined it, turned it into art and stories and games. Show us the latest data, Sarah commanded, and the room filled with holographic displays of the anomaly. It was beautiful in its wrongness. Shapes that couldn't exist, colors that hurt to look at, patterns that seemed to move even when they were still. Maya immediately began dancing through the data, her movements as much a part of her analysis as her calculations. Carmen started sketching modifications to their ships, designs that any sane engineer would call suicide, but that she called interesting challenges. Aiden stood in the middle of it all, his eyes closed, swaying slightly as if listening to music only he could hear. "This is why we'll succeed," Sarah told Observer quietly. "Not because we're brave or reckless or too stupid to know better, but because when we look at something that shouldn't exist, our first instinct isn't to run away or try to force it to make sense. We try to understand it on its own terms, even if those terms defy logic." Observer's tone carried both fascination and horror. "Especially then," Sarah smiled. "Humans have a saying, think outside the box. But we do more than that. We question whether the box needs to exist at all. And sometimes we find out it doesn't." As the team continued their preparations, Sarah received a message from Earth. More volunteers were pouring in, each with their own unique combination of skills and perspectives. Artists wanting to paint the impossible, musicians hoping to hear what physics breaking might sound like, philosophers eager to debate reality with an anomaly that questioned its foundations. "We're ready for the next phase," Sarah announced. "Maya, do you have what you need?" The physicist grinned, still moving to her internal rhythm. "I have no idea if any of this will work. Isn't it exciting?" And that, Sarah realized, was perhaps the most human response of all. Facing the unknown not with fear or rigid logic, but with curiosity, creativity, and an almost childlike enthusiasm for discovery. The collective had chosen humans because they thought we were reckless enough to survive. They were about to learn that our real strength lay in our ability to reimagine what survival meant. The human vessel, Curiosity, approached the quantum anomaly with what the collective considered alarming casualness. While their own ships had used elaborate shielding and remote probes, the humans had opted for a more direct approach. Carmen had redesigned their ship systems to be deliberately irregular, theorizing that predictable patterns were what the anomaly seemed to reject. "It's like trying to pat a cat," she'd explained to a bewildered observer. "Come at it head-on with rigid intent, and it'll run away. Let it think it's ignoring you, and suddenly it's in your lap." Sarah watched from the command chair as the anomaly filled their view screen. It was larger now, its impossible geometries more pronounced. Colors that shouldn't exist rippled across its surface, and space itself seemed to fold and unfold around it like an infinite origami. "Maya, what are you getting?" Sarah asked, noting how their physicist was now moving in sync with the anomaly's pulses, her hands tracing patterns in the air. "Everything and nothing," Maya replied, her voice distant. "It's like it's speaking in paradoxes. Every measurement contradicts itself, but the contradictions form patterns, beautiful ones." Aiden stood at his station, eyes closed, head tilted. "There's a rhythm to it, not just mathematical. It's almost like music," Carmen finished, her fingers dancing across her console. "The energy fluctuations, they're not random, they're harmonizing." Observer's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "Our scientists detected no such patterns." "Because you were looking for patterns that made sense," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "We're looking for patterns that don't need to make sense." "Maya, what happens if we try to harmonize with it?" Maya's eyes lit up. Carmen, can you modulate our shield frequency to match those energy fluctuations? Not to block them, but to dance with them. Already on it. Carmen grinned, her modifications already underway. Aiden, I need those chaos patterns. Feeding them through now, Aiden replied, his fingers moving across his console like a pianist. It's like jazz. We're not following a script. We're improvising. The Curiosity's systems began to hum with an odd resonance. On the view screen, the anomaly's colors shifted, its patterns changing in response to their approach. Observer watched in silent amazement as the humans essentially began having a conversation with an impossibility. We're getting something, Maya announced, her voice excited. The anomaly. It's not just breaking physics, it's playing with it. Like a child with building blocks, knocking them down to see what happens. Sarah leaned forward. Are you saying it's conscious? Not in any way we'd understand, Maya replied. But it's curious. Just like us. The ship shuddered as they drew closer, reality becoming increasingly questionable around them. Warning signals flared across every console, but they weren't the harsh alarms of the collected ships. Carmen had reprogrammed them to create a symphony of notification, sounds that actually formed a complex musical pattern. We're picking up fragments from the previous expeditions, Aiden reported, his voice tight with concentration. Their ships, their probes, they're all in there, but they've been reformed. Reimagined according to physics we can't understand. Observer's form pulsed with distress. You must retreat. This is beyond even your species' capacity for survival. But Sarah saw something in the swirling chaos before them. A pattern within patterns, a door that wasn't a door, a possibility that couldn't exist, but did anyway. Maya, what if we don't try to survive it? What if we let it change us? The physicist laughed, the sound almost manic with understanding. Yes, that's what the others got wrong. They tried to maintain their existence as they understood it. But we're human. We're used to reinventing ourselves. Carmen, drop the conventional shields, Sarah ordered. Aiden, push all power to Maya's harmonic resonance patterns. Observer, you might want to brace yourself. The crystalline being's protest was lost as the Curiosity surged forward. The anomaly reached out to them with tendrils of impossible light, and for a moment, everyone on the bridge experienced what it felt like to exist in multiple realities simultaneously. They were everywhere and nowhere, their consciousness spread across possibilities that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah felt herself thinking in colors that didn't exist, seeing sounds and hearing light. But unlike the logical minds of the collective's finest, the human crew didn't try to make sense of it. They embraced the impossibility, let it flow through them, added their own impossible thoughts to the mix. Maya was solving equations that couldn't exist, her mind dancing through dimensional spaces that had no right to be. Carmen was redesigning the laws of physics themselves, treating fundamental constants as variables in a grand experiment. Aiden was composing symphonies of probability, conducting an orchestra of quantum uncertainties. And Sarah was remembering something from her childhood. A kaleidoscope her grandmother had given her, how she would spend hours looking through it, delighting in how it broke the world into beautiful patterns that made no sense but were perfect anyway. The anomaly responded to their acceptance, their willingness to be transformed without losing their essential nature. It wasn't trying to destroy reality, they realized. It was trying to play with it, to explore what was possible beyond the rigid laws that govern normal space. When the Curiosity emerged on the other side of the anomaly, both ship and crew had been fundamentally changed. They understood things they couldn't explain, saw possibilities they couldn't describe, but they were still undeniably human, perhaps more so than ever, having proven that humanity's greatest strength was not our ability to impose order on chaos, but our willingness to dance with it. The Curiosity drifted in the space between spaces, its hull now shimmering with patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than physics should allow. The crew had survived their encounter with the anomaly, But survival had taken on an entirely new meaning. Sarah washed her hands as reality rippled around them, her consciousness simultaneously aware of multiple versions of herself across probability spaces that shouldn't exist. The experience would have driven the collective's logical minds to madness. But humans, with their lifelong practice of holding contradictory thoughts, adapted. "Status report," she called out, her voice echoing strangely through possibilities. "Define status." Maya replied with a laugh that scattered like rainbow fractals. She was floating near her station, her body occasionally phase-shifting through different quantum states. By conventional metrics, we're simultaneously dead, alive, and everything in between. By new metrics, we're amazing. Carmen was at her engineering station, though "at" had become a relative concept. Her hands moved through the ship's systems, not just monitoring them, but experiencing them from the inside. The ship's evolved. It's not just machinery anymore. It's more like a living equation. "Observer," Sarah called out. Their crystalline liaison had been silent since their transformation. The crystalline being's form flickered through multiple probability states, its usual geometric perfection disrupted by exposure to their changed state. This is impossible. You've become something that cannot exist." "Story of our species," Aiden commented. He was composing something on his console that looked like music, but expressed itself in quantum fluctuations. "We've been doing impossible things since we first looked up at the stars and decided to reach them." But Sarah was beginning to understand something deeper. The anomaly hadn't just changed them. It had revealed something about reality itself, and about humanity's unique place in it. "It's not a weapon," she said suddenly. "It's not even a natural phenomenon. It's a test." Maya's eyes widened with understanding. Of course, the collective civilizations evolved through logical progression, building their understanding of the universe step by orderly step. But the universe isn't just logical. It's also quantum, Carmen finished. Probabilistic, paradoxical. They advanced until they hit the limits of what pure logic could comprehend. "And then they found us," Aiden added. "A species that tells stories about impossible things for fun. A species that looks at the laws of physics and asks, what if?" Observer's form stabilized slightly. "You believe this was intentional. That something created this anomaly to find species capable of transcending conventional physics." Sarah stood, her movement leaving trails of probability through space-time. "Not just transcending physics, transcending our own limitations. Every species that came before tried to force the anomaly to make sense according to their understanding. We were the first to let it change that understanding." Through the view screen, they could see the anomaly expanding. But it no longer seemed threatening. It was reaching out, not to destroy, but to connect. The collective's fuel source was never in danger, Maya realized. The anomaly was drawing power because it needed to grow, to reach far enough to find a species that could understand it, that could join it. Carmen laughed. "So when they said this was the deadliest job in the galaxy, they were measuring the wrong kind of death," Aiden finished. "Not the death of the body, but the death of old limitations, old ways of thinking." Sarah turned to Observer. "Your scientists didn't disappear. They're still in there, preserved in quantum suspension, waiting for someone who could understand enough to bring them back. We can save them now." The crystalline being's form pulsed with something between hope and terror. "And what will they be when they return?" "Something new," Sarah replied. "Something more, just like us." But even as they prepared to rescue the lost expeditions, Sarah felt a new awareness growing. The anomaly wasn't just a test or a doorway. It was a harbinger. The universe was changing, evolving beyond the comfortable laws that had governed it for billions of years. And humanity, with its illogical creativity and its love of impossible things, had been chosen to help guide that evolution. "Maya," she called out, "start calculating a way to stabilize a corridor back to Earth. Carmen, see if you can find a way to translate what we've become into terms our old instruments can understand." "Aiden." keep composing. I think we're going to need new ways of communicating what we've discovered. She turned to Observer. Tell the collective to prepare themselves. The universe is about to become a much stranger place. Fortunately, that's exactly the kind of place humans do best in. The Curiosity hung in the quantum void, its crew now walking the line between what was and what could be. They had taken the deadliest job in the galaxy and turned it into something else entirely. Not an ending, but a transformation. A very human way of cheating death by redefining the terms of existence itself. The return to Earth marked the beginning rather than the end. The Curiosity emerged from its quantum state in high orbit, its hull still flickering with impossible colors, carrying a crew that had become living proof that reality was more flexible than anyone had imagined. News of their success had spread across the galaxy, but few understood what that success actually meant. The collective's representatives gathered at Earth's newly constructed space assembly, their various forms a testament to the diversity of life in the universe. But it was their expressions, confusion, awe, and something approaching fear, that truly set them apart. Sarah stood at the podium, her form occasionally shifting through quantum states as she spoke. Behind her, her crew displayed similar effects. Maya solving probability equations in midair, Carmen redesigning the laws of physics on the fly, and Aiden conducting symphonies of quantum possibilities. The anomaly was never a threat, Sarah explained, her voice resonating through multiple dimensions. It was an invitation that only a species comfortable with contradictions could accept. Observer, now serving as a bridge between the transformed humans and the collective, translated concepts that defied traditional physics into terms the assembly could grasp. They have not only survived the impossible, they have embraced it, integrated it, and made it their own. The lost expeditions had been recovered, their crews preserved in quantum suspension. Under the guidance of the transformed humans, they were slowly being reintegrated into normal spacetime, forever changed but intact. Their stories would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what was possible. Humanity's greatest strength. Maya addressed the assembly, her form splitting into quantum echoes as she spoke, was never our technology or our physical capabilities. It was our ability to look at the impossible and say, why not? Carmen stepped forward, her hands weaving reality like fabric. We spent our history telling stories about things that couldn't exist, dreaming up possibilities that defied logic. We weren't just preparing ourselves for the impossible, we were practicing for it. Every fairy tale, every science fiction story, every dream of things that couldn't be, Aiden added, quantum harmonies playing around his words. They were training us to think beyond the boundaries of what was supposed to be possible. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not just solved a problem. They had opened a door that could never be closed. The universe was entering a new phase of evolution, and humans, with their unique ability to embrace paradox and imagine the impossible, would be its guides. We offer this gift to the galaxy, Sarah declared. Not just the knowledge we've gained, but the perspective that made it possible. The ability to see reality not as a fixed set of rules, but as a canvas of infinite possibilities. The response was immediate and varied. Some species recoiled from the idea of such fundamental change. Others, inspired by humanity's example, began to explore their own capacity for impossible thinking. Earth itself was transformed, becoming a nexus where the conventional and quantum realms intersected, where the dreams of countless species could take flight. Research centers sprang up across the planet, where humans taught other species how to embrace paradox, how to think in ways that transcended pure logic. Art and science merged in new ways as humanity's creative spirit infected the galaxy with its particular brand of controlled chaos. The Curiosity's crew became legends, but more importantly, they became teachers. They showed others that the universe was stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined, and that the key to embracing that strangeness lay not in fighting it, but in dancing with it. Observer, watching Earth become a beacon for species seeking to transcend their limitations, finally understood what made humans different. Your species never accepted the universe as it was presented to you, it told Sarah. You always insisted it could be more. Sarah smiled, her form rippling with quantum possibilities. That's the real legacy of humanity. Not just surviving the impossible, but reimagining what's possible in the first place. As the story of the Curiosity spread across the galaxy, it carried with it a profound truth. The deadliest job in the galaxy had never been about facing death, but about transcending the boundaries of existence itself. And humans, with their impossible dreams and their refusal to accept limitations, had turned it into something beautiful. The universe would never be the same, but then again, change was what humans did best.